First of all, congratulations on your Emmy nomination. It's really nice to meet you. As we get started here, this is a treat for me because you are somewhat a part of In Session film lore. We've talked about you a lot over the last decade or so, specifically with How to Train Your Dragon, but also Solo, the Bourne movies, among others. We even recently had an episode where we talked about the best scores of all time, and you were a big part of that conversation. So I can't begin to articulate how honored I am for this. So thanks for joining me today in this conversation.
Thank you very much.
So obviously we're talking about your latest film, Still, a Michael J. Fox movie, which isn't just about the life and career of Michael J. Fox, but his deep innate desire to keep creating despite the hurdles he faced after his diagnosis. How would you describe your approach in trying to capture the heart of that with your music?
Um, I mean, my approach was part of sort of the casting that Davis did in in talking to me and asking me
Hmm.
to do it.
Yeah.
He didn't want somebody who would come to it with a sort of a a pre-built knowledge of how documentaries should be done, I think,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
this is the first one I ever did. So
Yeah.
I was in the deep end a bit, but it seemed such a virtuosic kind of piece of work when I started watching, when he showed me a few bits at the beginning.
Hmm.
I just realized, I could tell that this was about sort of an irrepressible nature, about somebody who had danced their way through life
Yeah.
and is still dancing, despite,
Yeah.
sort of being given a lot of things to trip over. Um,
Hmm.
and I love the idea of making, music that represented that spirit and
Yeah.
didn't wallow in any way. Apparently, Michael had said to Davis when Davis was asking him to do the film at the very beginning, he said, "All right,
Hmm.
I'll do it, but definitely no violins." Okay, so
Yeah.
and
Okay.
in the sense of no sentimentality. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
that was when Davis kind of downloaded basically the whole sort of you know hopes he had for it right at the beginning.
Hmm.
It's like I felt, well, I'm maybe I can do this, maybe I can be useful, because I'd never thought of doing a documentary, and I'd certainly,
Hmm.
you know, um, I've discovered it's way harder than I thought.
Yeah, that is, it's really interesting. You talk about your approach, the lack of sentimentality, because one element I kept thinking about was how it demonstrated his prowess as an entertainer. He was always magnetic on screen. He's very funny. He has great comedic timing. But with his diagnosis and his desires to get more funding for research on Parkinson's, there's an inherent somber quality to that. Did you find it at all tricky finding the balance in those tones, especially given that direction you're talking about and trying to avoid conventional sentimentality?
Yeah, it was difficult. I basically started out by just ignoring it completely,
Mm,
and try to sort of capture something in him and his relationship with his wife, with his family,
yeah.
with the world. Uh,
Hmm.
and I just sort of, I've done this. People have asked me about action scenes and things. I always say, well, I try and approach them as if I was writing a ballet. So how
Mm,
to,
yeah.
each part of life you could sort of say is a type of dance. you know.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
his life was very much based on a very fast dances, and he had to slow down a little bit, but he's not
Mhm.
really changed what he is,
Yeah.
despite his body changing. Um,
Yeah.
and so I just needed a continuity through it, and that was rhythm, pulse, and
Hmm.
all those kind of things. The one thing that we found quite late on, and ironically, was kind of spurred by this term of no violins, was we were watching the very opening, and the editor had put in a kind of a very high, kind of like, I think what they call, it's like a tone that is so high you're not quite sure what it is, and what it's doing. It sort of represents in cinematic terms sort of pain and kind of a sort of like after an explosion. In fact, I think that's basically sort of, we all know it from Saving Private Ryan. It's like on the beach when the artillery goes off and they kind of mute all the sound and they just have this high frequency. So they were kind of using it in sound effects. And I said to David, says, well, what if we try that with a violin? Because if you if you take a violin, you can get some really high notes, almost above hearing range.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of a grunge to them because of the way that, you've got an incredibly short piece of string now, and then you've got an incredibly old technology of a horse's tail, that's got a wood, resin rubbed into it, and basically it's split. It's like, how you have split ends. That's basically, it's a horse with split ends, and you drag that over this incredibly short metal string on a violin, and it's very hard to make that sound pretty. And what I then liked was that I could make it, and so right at the very beginning, you'll hear that, and it's kind of like it's a rubbing sound that's pressing on something, but it's alerting you to tension and stress, but not sure. So then I spent the rest of the score trying to get that, so that by the end of the movie, you understand the beauty of what that struggle has done for him. And so it's exactly the same sound at the beginning and the end, but I think you end up with it feeling differently about it.
No, that's really fascinating, hearing that kind of insight and those level of details, because the opening scenes, you really do get a sense that there is some tension, and we as an audience know where it's going in some ways, but you do capture that essence very well. And then with all the comedy and him as a performer, there's some fun to be had there, which you tap into. So by the end of the film, it's interesting to see that evolution and hear it with your music. And I do love how it ends, because it offers up this idea that while life throws these unexpected curveballs, there's still hope to be found, that you can overcome those obstacles and still be creative. So I was wondering, is there a score or a piece of music that no matter how many times you listen to it, it still gives you a feeling of hope or inspiration?
Oh, there's so many.
I know that's a tough one.
It is. It's like there's certain pieces of music that I find so they allow me to transition, shall we say, into a different state very much. And I see things that I've never seen any other way. I mean, it's like the beauty of nature, captured. There's sometimes you're just awestruck by what you can see in nature and what you can smell, and animals and insects, and the details of life are incredibly awe-inspiring. And sometimes I listen to what's a good some very different examples of the same thing is the joy I feel in a little bit. And there's a moment in Daphnis and Chloe by Ravel, gives me exactly the same feeling as Best of Your Love by the Emotions. There's a section where it comes to the second time round before it hits the chorus, and it's extended, and there's something about that, it just makes me just fly. And it's the same with the Ravel and the Daphnis and Chloe, and if you listen to them side by side, I'm sure you'd say like, this guy's got a screw loose, but to me that it hits exactly the same place of joy and I don't know, the value of existence. So I'm very lucky to be in a world where I can play with trying to say some of that as well, in collaboration with other people who are talented.
No, that's fascinating. Is it pandering for me to say that Forbidden Friendship is that piece of music for me? Because my God, no matter how many times I listen to that, it hits me deeply. Absolutely love it.
It is interesting you say that, because of all the pieces that people really love, I always put a lot of weight on the storytelling.
Oh yeah, the storytelling has a
Yeah.
lot to do with it as well. Like I can't separate that piece of music and the visuals that accompany it. Like it's all together. And again, like that poster back there is there all the time. Like it's not here just for this interview,
yeah.
I promise. Like that movie is it means something deeply to me, which again, going back to my opening here, it's fascinating getting to talk to you as much as I've talked about it. But yeah, every time I listen to it, especially now that I have kids, you know, and I'm watching these movies with them, it just that music just evolves over time. Like as I get older and new things come up, it's just fascinating. So, um, so another question I had for you about film composing, and I wanted to actually focus this specifically on award season. You're obviously nominated for an Emmy for your work here on Still. And I do love that the Emmys do emphasize documentaries, because on the film side, it's much more rare, despite some ravishing scores coming from documentaries over the years. And I've always held the opinion that more documentary scores should be considered for awards. Do you envision a world where that might be the case in the future with film, on the film side anyway, with something like the Oscars?
Well, the Oscars is complicated because, you're dealing with an organization that has nothing but sort of the wonderful expectation of celebrating, artistry. That's what it's
Mhm.
about. But then you also have this show,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
the two things are not necessarily connected. One's an
Yeah.
entertainment show, and the other one is about
Yeah.
us all saying, okay, well, what's good? Who's good? What's been going on? What should we all look at? It's just a chat. The Oscars, the organization Ampus is really just a chat room of people who are in the business who are going, wow, did you see that? That was really
Yeah.
good. But
Sure.
then the
Yeah.
show itself is a sort of a variety show and a sort of a reality show into people who are sometimes articulate about
Mhm. Yeah.
having dreamed a dream and getting there, and that's
Uh-huh.
interesting for people to watch as well. and
Mhm.
and they also share in, obviously, having seen the material, having seen the films that have been made.
Mhm.
Documentaries are wonderfully celebrated, I think, in at the Oscars. However, obviously, they don't want to have what the Emmys have, which is one music for documentaries versus
Yeah.
music
Yeah.
for features, because otherwise, they won for a few years. They had romantic comedies like
Yes.
and they
Yeah.
had
Mhm.
dramas, and that only stayed for a couple of years, and we'll never get sort of more splits back of these kind of
Mhm.
sub things. So it is a question of, really, I think, the music branch, who is what, 500 or 600 people, sort of understanding that documentaries have, and I can say it now, which is documentaries are really hard for composers. I didn't realize.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd hope that the Academy voters, the thing is that once you get out to the general population, it's every other kind of creative person in film, but
Mhm.
the nominations are done just by your branch, and in
Yes.
this case, it's
Mhm.
600 people who have been in the business, of music
Yeah.
for film. Hopefully they will understand that some of these documentaries have such good scores, uh,
Yeah.
that they
I
should be nominated. But it tends to
yeah.
be that you know it's for, I don't know. I mean, I've not really cracked the awards thing ever. I've tried not to worry about it too much, because
Sure. Yeah.
um I don't want any of my decisions to be made entirely,
Oh,
on
sure,
whether
for
I think
sure. Yeah.
if I like the film, that's the most important thing to me. There's films I
Mhm.
like that would never win an Oscar, and I think they're way better
Oh,
than
yeah.
films that have been lauded. So my taste is what drives me.
Mhm.
In this case, I thought I was actually making a film. I didn't realize it was even could be part of the Emmy. So this has been a very nice
Yeah.
surprise for me.
No, yeah, it's really great, and you're right. There's certainly a lot that goes into the Oscars and what gets nominated and whatnot, but I'm happy that at least the animated films have somewhat of
Yeah.
a say when it comes to best original score, and hopefully documentaries and genre films, horror films can be a part of that conversation in the near future as well. The last question I have for you, this is actually from my co-host who could not be here for this conversation, but he did want me to ask you this. He wants to know who your desert island pick would be. What one catalog would you choose?
One catalog of
Yes.
music.
Yeah. One band, artist, composer. What
Oh,
catalog?
so hard.
Yeah.
It could be
Yeah.
Ravel, but Ravel wrote so little.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
you'd be going around the
Saying
same,
the same thing over
like,
and over.
2 CDs worth. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe Vaughan Williams, I think. But I'm a bit Catholic in the sense that I like lots of bits of different people, and not. I don't sort of absorb myself into everything that everybody wrote. And there's certainly things that I think, there's moments when Debussy has exploded my head over and over again, and then every now and again I hear one piece and it doesn't. So those kind of expectations from a composer. So I'd be worried about trying to sort of put one person for a desert island. I think that would be hard.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But or one player or one type of instrument. I mean, I really would want so many different, very obscure, not obscure, but very different ends of the spectrum.
Sure.
Otherwise, I'd be very miserable, I'm pretty sure. But I would be anyway, because I don't like camping.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, thankfully, or hopefully anyway, we never find ourselves in that situation anyway, but yeah, it's always interesting to talk about. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was great to meet you. Good luck with everything. And again, congratulations on the Emmy nomination. Great film. Love the score.